Greetings, Audio Avengers! Welcome to the Marvelous TV Club, your headquarters for the most insightful and entertaining discussions of the latest episode of Marvel television. And that means it's time for our second of 3 pods on the second of 6 Loki episodes. If you've listened to this show before, you know what makes us unique. It's the way we sort our discussions into 3 distinct shows. This helps us have more focused conversations and makes it easier for you, the listener, to remember what the heck we talked about. Storycast is live, and Maeve and Amanda reveal the themes driving this episode. Last week was fate versus free will, and this week was all about order versus chaos. Plus, we get into how our ideologies can define our very reality, which honestly is a pretty PonderVision angle on the whole episode. On Monday, our character cast of Christine Kippens will compare and contrast our 2 Lokis / Sylvies and continue our assessment of the sketchy employees of the TVA. But now it is time for this show, PonderVision. This is the show that tackles the most captivating conundrums raised by the episode and teases out their implications for the MCU and for our own lives when we feel like it. I am your multi-hyphenate host, producer, editor, social media maven, and more, Marc Faletti. And as always on PonderVision, I am joined by the attorney who would surely sue Roxcart for everything they are worth, Jesse Taylor. How's it going, brother?
It's going well, and I'm just happy to be fighting for the good guys in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Roxcart has an army of attorneys, but I trust you to take them on. Look, before we dive in, I just want to remind folks we have the new website up. It's got a bunch of merch. If you like our Loki logo, you can get that on a bunch of stuff now and only through the time that Loki is on. So if you want it, now's the time to get it. We're on Twitter and Insta now. We are already big on Facebook. For us, big on Facebook. Feeling very good about it. All at Marvelous TV Club is the handle, so find us, talk to us. But Jesse, before we get into all this, I'm fascinated by Marvel's fascination with the song Holding Out for a Hero, because I'm sure you noticed that was in the opening scene of this episode, but it was also in that trailer for the Guardians of the Galaxy game.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so I guess Marvel just is, A, bought the rights to that song and put it everywhere they could, or B, is really in love with it. It is a truly iconic montage song. I will absolutely give them that. And it made me wonder, Jesse, what would be your montage song of choice? If you were doing battle or training for something, what would be the song you would want played?
So I've got to go with the one that's stuck with me since the moment I saw the movie. You're the Best Around from Karate Kid.
Such a good choice. I thought you might say The Touch, honestly, given our previous conversation.
It's true, but I don't know. I don't think of The Touch as a montage song.
Yeah, you're right.
I think of it more as like an overlay song than a montage song.
Yeah, it's like a song for the final round of something, not like...
That's the song that's played when it looks like you're going to fail in the final fight.
Right.
And then you find your inspiration to come back.
Yeah, You're the Best Around is a great call. I have that on Rock Band, and I can play the drums on that, and it's like really fun to play the drums on that song, man. I am a sucker for the Le Tigre song Decepticon. It's got a nice Transformer riff there in the title, but I've never seen it used for a montage song. If you don't know this song, go look it up on Spotify or Apple Music or whatever and check it out. It's very catchy. It's got like a great guitar riff, and everyone's kind of like shouting numbers and stuff, and it's just like a very cool, energetic song. I feel like my training routine montage or my fight montage would 100% be Decepticon.
I like it. I don't think I've heard that song in a while. I'm going to go listen to it.
Yeah, go check that out and tell me if I've, fucked up my training and now I'll never reach my peak of powers because I chose poorly on the song. Look, Jesse and I have selected 4 topics in dire need of deep investigation by your PonderVision pair. We are going to talk a lot about the cafeteria situation at the TVA. So if that's not your type of thing, you can go ahead and exit this podcast and come back for Character Cast, because that's the kind of shit we get into on PonderVision. We will also get into the various Lokis that we've met. We will get into the sacred timeline and its keepers. And of course, we've got some fascinating questions about the past itself. Jesse and I have seen the questions, but not each other's answers. We're just going to take each other wherever the conversation goes. That's the fun of PonderVision. But I'm serious, Jesse. I want to start in the cafeteria, man. Loki made a whole thing out of the salad and the salt and the peppers. So I'm not the weird one here. If anyone's weird, it's Loki. But I was really bummed out by Mobius's food options, that sad salad. We talked a little bit about it on Storycast, but I'm still chewing on it, no pun intended. And that weird drink Casey was drinking, I mean, maybe it was cool and good. I don't know. It didn't look delicious when he poured it out over the salad. So I'm wondering, how do you think the cafeteria works at the TVA? Does it tie into personality and like give you food that it knows you want? Do you get to choose what's going on? How does this thing work?
So I think it is the constant disappointment of every cafeteria you've ever been in. Ooh. Whether it's at a school, a workplace, a hospital, those are the big three areas. And how I presume it works. So we know that Josta Cola, which is Mobius's drink of choice, was only out for a couple of years. Which means that the TVA has to either be pulling this from the late 80s, early 90s every time he wants one, or they found a way to replicate it. But it also means it has to be his preference. And I'm assuming that whatever Casey was drinking, I didn't know if it was like boxed water or milk or maybe some kind of juice. It wasn't clear what it was. But it was something that was very specific to, I assume, another time or another place.
Yeah, it must be.
And so here's how I presume it works. Cafeterias work in bulk. And so what I think it is everyone encounters something that they liked. You know, like maybe you are on a TVA mission and you find, do you remember those old Hostess pies, the Ninja Turtle ones that had the green ooze inside?
Absolutely, man.
So here's what I think happens. You go back in time and you get one of those and you eat it. And you make the comment, this is the most delicious thing I've ever had.
Okay.
And then you are locked in at the TVA cafeteria to having one of those green slime Hostess pies every time you eat lunch.
Oof. I can't decide if that's hell or what. That's an interesting one. Let's talk about this Josta Cola that you bring up. As you say, it was only out for a few years in the late 80s. It was the first energy drink ever marketed as such by Pepsi. So I was like, of course, Mobius picked that up on a work trip, right? But that would mean that there are some deep customization options at this cafeteria, and I'm skeptical about that. And I'm also skeptical that Mobius would be up for trying this Josta, this thing that he doesn't know anything about and has no context for in 1985 or 86. He's never ridden a jet ski, so we know he's playing it safe. And yeah, he loves jet skis, but Josta doesn't exactly scream like exciting jet ski type experience. So I'm struggling to believe that he actually took a risk and took a swig of a random Josta Cola. And given that, I actually feel like Josta seems like the kind of thing an AI would assume was a good drink because it's made by a popular parent company of a specific era and was the first of a popular class of drink known as energy drinks. But would get it all wrong, right? It would serve up this like classic mistake. So I'm kind of leaning towards the idea that Mobius has been fed Josta since he stepped out of a clone tube, and this is the only drink he's ever known. Does that sway you at all? Are you still on the like Mobius picked it up on the path kind of a thing?
The only issue I have with it is that we know that there's at least one other drink option. And we also know that Mobius drinks alcohol. So Mobius has tried other things. He knows that there are other liquids out there. I mean, one question is, does Josta Cola does the cola that he drinks taste like Josta Cola?
Oh,
or is it
question.
just Josta Cola is something that he thought looked cool or he has a historical fascination with it? So every time he gets anything to drink, it looks like Josta Cola, but it could be water, it could be orange juice, it could be something else entirely.
Okay, the whiskey thing is moving me because you're right. He was really into the whiskey. He's clearly had it many times by coming to our office. If that was so unusual, if all you'd ever had was just a cola in your life, it would be extremely unsettling to drink that whiskey, I would think. But he doesn't think twice about it. So, I don't know. There's something about the bloat of this bureaucracy that just makes me skeptical that you get exactly what you want. And that's where I kept coming back to Josta as like an off-brand version of the kind of thing you might want.
And I like that. There's something to that, because if you look at the visual design of the TVA, if you even look at kind of the muted tone jacket that Loki gets from a plastic package.
And the tie, yeah.
Yeah, everything about this place is standardized and uniform, and done to process things as quickly as possible, or at least as efficiently as possible, which for a place that seemingly exists outside of time and has either all the time in the universe or time doesn't matter at all, you'd wonder why they're so focused on efficiency. But that gets to maybe a whole set of other things about what priorities the space lizards have put in place.
Well, let's take the optimistic view, Jesse, and say that the TVA can design a custom meal, but it's not based on what you want. It's the same thing you described, because you talked about like, okay, I have this Hostess thing and I think this is really good and I eat this and then that's kind of my meal forever. So let's go down that path a little bit. Let's say their algorithm would assess what you, Jesse Taylor, have eaten over the years and had to drink over the years. And you get basically a meal that is served to you every day. It may not be what you want, but it would be based on what you have consumed. What would be the drink and food that the TVA would decide is your daily meal?
If it's sort of a holistic look at my life and what I've consumed the most of or consumed the most obsessively.
You got to be honest here. The AI knows everything.
Oh, yeah. The problem is you're then going back to my teenage years. So it's probably going to be some mix of like Taco Bell soft tacos and Mountain Dew. And it would be that every single day because I did not have an extensive palate when I was a teenager.
Right.
And the second I discovered Taco Bell, I remember it was just like, why would you eat anything else? It's technically got things that look like vegetables. It's got protein. You can get the tacos in soft or hard form. So it's like a diversity of food. You have options. And then, of course, who doesn't love an ice cold Mountain Dew to wash it all down?
That tracks for me. Although I'm impressed that you decided that your teenage years are the thing that they would draw from and not, we talked about middle age last week, Jesse. I think we spent more time in adulthood than our teenage years. So you might be.
We have, but I've never been that sort of monomaniacally obsessed with like one food and one drink at any other point in my life.
I am always monomaniacally obsessed with one thing or another. So I've been drinking. Do you know what Mio is? That stuff the flavor?
Yeah, you kind of squirt it in the water.
Yeah, this shit right here. I'm putting it on the screen for Jesse. This is the orange vanilla Mio. It is sugar-free and it tastes like a creamsicle. And I drink like a gallon of water a day with this stuff right now. So first of all, my water consumption is through the roof. Now, what it says that I'm consuming all of that water in a fluorescent orange is, for my intestines or whatever, who knows? I'm sure I'll find out when I'm 60 and I'm sure I'll still be podcasting here on the TV Club. I'll tell you all about it when I get that diagnosis. But for now, orange vanilla Mio, I can't get enough of it. And I honestly think if I had to drink this for every drink for the rest of my life, I would be totally fine. So that's number one. And then I was thinking, to your point as well, about teenage years, but also into adulthood. And I would say, again, this doesn't speak super well of me, Jesse. The number one thing I have eaten is reheated pizza. Because I also wanted to think of the sad TVA version. Like, what's the sort of a sad salad of my life? And the sad salad of my life, Jesse, is reheated pizza. And I'm afraid that, well, I was actually pretty good always about finding the good local place. The TVA version would be some Domino's reheated type shit. And I would just be in my sad place with that. But the plus side is I would get unlimited white cheddar Cheez-Its, I think.
And that's actually a good point. Like, let's say we take the TVA and we go a little bit toward what you were talking about, where it's kind of like they maybe have a set of categorical options based on study, optimization, etc. But it all comes out as sad cafeteria food.
Oh, man.
And if that's the case, I think mine is going to be a microwave burrito, like an Amy's microwave burrito.
Oh, no. Yeah, like a distant echo of even Taco Bell. Oh,
exactly. Jesse. Maybe there's some sauce and cheese on it, but probably not. It's probably just like this dry shell that gets even harder once you microwave it. But it's like, and it'll be cold on the ends, but hot in the middle or vice versa.
Oh my gosh. Well, I want to get semi-serious for a second about this cafeteria then. If the TVA is supposedly as powerful as they make themselves out to be in their fancy cartoons, why did they design people that need to eat at all?
Presuming that the TVA, the people who are native to TVA, let's say, are created by our space lizard overlords, I think in an optimistic scenario or in a, hopefully an efficient, understanding design scenario, you have to design people who understand some part of the experience they're overseeing.
Yeah.
If you're they're already completely removed from the human experience of time slash I'll say the corporeal experience of time, because we know it's not just human. If they didn't experience time and they didn't have any physical needs, we talked a little bit about this last week, but they have some discretion when they're in the field, discretion about how human experience works, discretion about when to reset versus fix a timeline versus leave it alone. And if they don't understand anything about that lived experience, they can't be, I don't think they could be making good decisions. So I'm taking that perspective on it, that you have to give them some element of that experience in order for them to properly manage the sacred timeline.
Yeah, and if they have to go out in the field, I guess, and they don't know what eating is or how to eat or to pass themselves off, they could very easily get found out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all right. We don't know of any evidence of people who have time auras or what temporal auras, right? That was what our robot scanner dude was talking about, who don't eat food. So maybe in order to travel around and do all this time stuff, they need to be able to consume food. And, all right, I'm buying that. I was thinking this might be a sign that the TVA continues to be kind of a bunch of scammers, because they can only clone or create beings that we know already exist, like humans, but you actually make a pretty darn compelling point. And they don't want to make their TVA people so powerful that they can do a bunch of wild magic or shapeshift or any of that stuff, because then that's just a revolution waiting to happen, which, while I would enjoy watching it, I'm guessing the timekeepers would not.
If the entire goal is to prevent variance, and Loki, the magical creature, is the most persistent / dangerous variant that exists, I could also see wanting to put in limitations so that you don't create an army of Lokis who get tempted by their own power.
Okay, well, let's talk about that army of Lokis now, Jesse. There were a lot of them that we saw. Which Loki do we want to begin with? Frost Giant Loki, who, Tour de France winning Loki. Where should we start?
There are so many to choose from, but also I feel like we didn't get to see enough Lokis.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of my biggest complaints. I could have let that little montage go on for another 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, I wonder how much is on the cutting room floor, like different options they talked about in post. If they were like sketching this out in the production design meetings and stuff, and being like, which Lokis do we show? Because how do you settle on bike race winner?
Right, and they lingered on bike race Loki for a while.
Yeah, he looked good in his little biker outfit. I'm sure it was, popular.
Yeah, I feel like they just raided a wardrobe closet somewhere on set and said, how many of these will you wear? Tom, just put them on. Just keep putting them on.
Just grab different shit from the other sound stages in Atlanta where they filmed this thing and see what he looks like. Well, let's stick with the Loki we're technically supposed to be rooting for, I suppose. Do you have something we want to talk about on him?
I do. So how did you feel about Loki's initial scheme? It kind of came about abruptly, but his initial scheme to stall for time to get an audience with the timekeepers. We saw it sort of, the entire scheme played out in a few minutes. He comes up with it, pretends that he knows exactly what the variant's doing, and then uses it to try to demand an audience with the timekeepers, and immediately gets shot down by Mobius.
I was all ready to give this man his props, but I did give the episode another gander tonight, Jesse, and I have to say I'm disappointed in my main man Loki, because it's actually true that Mobius gives him the idea. When they're headed out to that mission, Mobius is the one who references the idea that, hey, play your cards right, maybe I'll get you that meeting with the timekeepers, and Loki's like, that's on the table? Mobius was clearly setting up Loki for creating that plan in his head, which is why when Loki says later in the episode, I've been playing my own game this whole time, Mobius is like, you mean meet with the timekeepers and take over the TVA? Well, I gotcha. So I'm sort of disappointed that he didn't realize that he was being manipulated by having that carrot put out in his face. But maybe I'm being too harsh on our man. What did you think about it?
So I initially liked it because it was a brute force scheme. It wasn't particularly subtle, and I think we all knew exactly where it was going. But I also liked it as sort of Loki working through his system.
That's great.
And you have to figure Loki is a scammer. He is an artist, a connoisseur of this. And to the extent that I've read about scammers, listened to podcasts about scammers, have any experience with them, scammers like to start with sort of the easiest scam first to see if it works.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. If you just can get your foot in the door by doing the like, hey, I'm the refrigerator inspector, and then all of a sudden you get a meal. Hey, that works. That's great. You know exactly what kind of mark you're working with. If it doesn't work, you haven't actually expended a lot of effort. You haven't put a lot into the scam. The fact that it failed just means you can come back later and you do something more elaborate, and you need to work a little bit harder. So I did like it from that perspective, that it was Loki basically saying, okay, this is on the table. 5 minutes of play acting. If I can get this meeting with the timekeepers, let's give it a shot, because it's not going to actually ruin his place in the TVA yet. It's a mark against him. But even if it fails, it didn't hurt anybody. And maybe it works. Yeah.
No, in fact, Mobius even says he was going along with it for a second. He kind of got roped in by Loki's shenanigans. So by sending out a kind of con artist sonar, he's kind of testing the range and radius of what he can get away with. I was struggling to even think about another option for what his game could be. We did see him try to mess with the file clerk and get his hands on the creation of the TVA documents and the files about the timekeepers and whatever, and none of that was successful, and she didn't seem very impressed with his scams there either. But once again, he was able to get away with it, and that also felt like maybe another sonar ping out into the realm of the TVA. And it was interesting watching Loki both admire and be disappointed by Mobius at turns throughout the episode, which is exactly what he said to Mobius during their conversation, that as soon as it turned towards questions about who they are and whether these space lizards are real and what they mean, that, he was very impressed with Mobius until they got into this space. So I think Loki really does seem to be in an evaluative position, trying to make sense of whether he has a worthy adversary or an easy mark.
As we've seen, Mobius is more formidable than Loki thought at the beginning, and the TVA is more formidable. But he's also got access and is pressing them in a way we don't know that the TVA has ever been pressed.
The TVA, you would think, had seen it all. That's one of the many mystifying things about them, Jesse. You would think they've gotten all manner of variants. Anyone they've captured who had at least one of those Infinity Stones, much less two of them, would be at least as formidable as Loki. How is it that they seem so surprised by his shenanigans? I don't get it.
I mean, is it just that they've never given a variant this level of access before?
Well, to hear Ravonna Renslayer talk about it, you would think this is pretty unprecedented. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe that's just it. They've witnessed him from afar, and perhaps it goes, it's the jet ski thing. If Loki is the jet ski, it's the first time they've ever had access to this thing that they've viewed from afar and probably killed, dozens of times over.
It's true.
But it's the first time they've ever actually been in a room with a Loki, in the same way that you can handle something on paper, it doesn't mean you can actually handle it in real life.
Right. Just because you hunt an animal doesn't mean you can raise it or tame it.
So thinking of our other Loki, and having read a few things since the show aired and also listened to Storycast this morning, I missed that the bad evil variant Loki,
okay,
as I like to call her, Bevel.
Wait, Bevel. Bad evil
variant.
How does that? Okay, bad evil variant
Loki.
Okay. All right. Bevel.
Yeah.
All right.
And I missed that she's named Sylvie.
Well, I think it's an accident, right?
Right. It wasn't supposed to be. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for folks who didn't catch this on Storycaster or hadn't seen this, in the credits just for the Castilian version of Spanish for the voiceovers, they labeled the character Sylvie. All the other credits labeled her as the variant, which is the name of the episode, but the Castilian one said Sylvie. I'm guessing they put the wrong episode's credit for the voiceover there, that we'll find out maybe at the very first scene of next episode. I don't think this is going to turn out to be some massive spoiler, but they did call her Sylvie in that credit sequence. Yeah, so anyway, that's the bad evil variant Loki. I did not mean to take you off your stride there, Jesse. Where were you taking us?
Not a problem. Bad evil variant Loki hides in apocalypses because the effect on the timeline is virtually nil. She can't be tracked there. Now, our hero evil variant Loki, our Loki, he escaped from the aftermath of one apocalypse, which was the Battle of New York, during an effort to prevent a second apocalypse, which was Thanos' snap.
Okay.
Is there something else going on here? How is it that he is at the intersection of two different apocalypses and his variance is so strong that he's tracked down? Is it just because of where he ended up in non-apocalypse Mongolia? Or is there something else going on? Like, was it because what happened with the Avengers was supposed to happen, so they kind of knew in advance that this Loki would escape? Or what's going on here?
I will go textual. I'm gonna become a Marvel lawyer on your ass, Jesse, and take it to the text. I'm gonna go for the narrow definition here, which is
Counselor, you have the floor.
So Mobius says during their conversation about apocalypses, it has to be naturally occurring with no warning and no survivors. So that would disqualify New York City, because obviously there are fortunately a ton of survivors. If Loki had succeeded in actually killing everybody in New York City, I think it'd be even tougher to root for him. But also Loki is not naturally occurring, obviously, although, he is a god. So maybe that's up for debate. But yeah, so there was, I guess, technically a tiny bit of warning. Actually, I don't think there was any warning. So I think he does kind of qualify for that. So I think it might be the case that this Loki was never technically hiding in an apocalypse, though the affinity for apocalypses or almost apocalypses, impotent apocalypses, unclimaxed apocalypses, blue ball apocalypses.
Little itty bitty weeny apocalypses.
This Loki, our hero evil variant Loki, happens to be close to some near misses on apocalypses, but bad evil variant Loki somehow figured out this plan. I wonder how you come to that conclusion about apocalypses. You have to guess it's by accident as opposed to by design, right?
You would think so. And how our Loki, hero evil variant Loki, figures this out is by reading a TVA file, which presumably the bad version doesn't have access to. Now, if she does have access to TVA files, that raises a whole series of other questions about how much the TVA is actually corrupted and whether the Timekeepers might want her to succeed.
Well, we know they were cool with the Avengers doing their stuff, and that's even with Steve Rogers in that 2012 timeline tipping off Hydra, that he knows about them and all these other things. I know I talked in the past about, I think I have. I don't remember what's in the group chat and what's on the shows sometimes, but I think Amanda said the same thing on Storycast this week. It all blends together. But look, if Loki goes back to the exact moment in 2012 that he left at the end of this series and lives out his life as he's supposed to, for whatever reason, then technically the timeline is fine. But there are definitely things in 2012 that you would think would have some significant alterations, but the TVA is okay with it. So maybe, Jesse, you are onto something with the idea that there's a corruption element here, that maybe this Loki can also get away with some things because of that. And that's why they caught our hero Loki as opposed to our other Loki.
And speaking of our evil Loki, eviler Loki.
Is she?
I know. Do you have any theories based on what we know? And I'm taking just the TV show because there's some comic book stuff about the character Sylvie that would explain this. But do you have any theories about why the variant Loki that has been the focus of the first two episodes is a blonde lady?
I do have a theory on that, but we should put some of the Sylvie stuff to bed a little bit too, because I know that folks are wondering probably what's going on with that. And one thing that a smart Redditor spotted is that in one of the files Loki looks at, so this is textual evidence from this episode, they do refer to one of the Lokis as Sylvie Laufey's daughter. And that's Dottir at the end, Laufey's daughter. Obviously, this is a reference to the fact that when you have a kid in, Norse land stuff, they're often the son of whoever, right? So Loki is Loki Laufey's son, but Laufey's daughter means obviously that's the daughter. So this character does seem to be this Sylvie, if that is in fact the name of the variant when we meet her fully next episode, hopefully. Then it is the case that she is quote unquote a Loki. but might be, in fact, a mashup of a character called the Enchantress, which a character also, a version of the Enchantress character was also named Sylvie in the comics. So you have the fact that this Loki's Sylvie is probably a version of Loki, but in the comics, there's a Sylvie that is also the Enchantress, who has blonde hair, wears green stuff, also from Asgard, also quite a powerful mage. But Jesse, that's not why I think she's actually blonde, because who cares if her hair is blonde, even though the Enchantress's hair is blonde in the comics. Loki, our Loki, hero, evil variant Loki, is raven-haired and known for his raven hair. His raven hair is iconic. It's one of the main things we associate with this character, but bad evil variant Loki, our Bevel Loki, is blonde simply to clearly signal, in my opinion, contrast and opposition, that she is not like him. Mobius says to Renslayer, understanding this Loki gets me closer to that Loki, but I think her hair is part of exposing Mobius's fallacy, that isn't actually true, that this Loki truly is substantively different, and it's just a visual representation of that.
I like that, but I'm going to layer on some completely wild speculation.
I like it. Take me there.
So we know that one of the apocalypses that Loki wants to see is Ragnarok. And at this point, our 2012 Loki does not know that he was the one who actually triggered Ragnarok. I'm not even sure, based on what he saw in that selectively edited video, if he knows about Hela.
Right.
And so I could also see that the Loki we get, the Bevel Loki, bad evil variant, may have actually been inspired by Hela, who in a lot of ways, and you mentioned this I think in our group text, but Hela is sort of Loki without the flaws, has the sense of purpose, has the sense of destiny, and has tremendous power, but doesn't constantly get sidetracked by being up her own ass about everything. And so I can also see a situation where Loki gets to see Ragnarok, gets to see both his role in it and Hela's role in it. And that variant that we've been tracking says, my destiny is not just as Loki. My destiny is absorbing the lessons that I learned from Hela, which may include adopting some of her physical appearance.
I like that idea. It's a little scary. It means that this Loki should be pretty afraid of that Loki. Obviously, I think there's some truth to that already, because, she has to know something about the TVA. I'm still thinking about what you were talking about before, about whether she had access to those files, because how else would you even know about these various time reset devices?
Right. And there's a question of, is there both dimensionality and time? Could this be a Loki from a different dimension that also has its TVA? Although I don't think we're going to get both multiverse and time in one show. That's just too many concepts and too much jumping around, I think.
Maybe, though.
I know. I think the origin of this Loki has to lie in her having observed something about the TVA. The TVA either had to have made a mistake, or there has to be some corruption that led to this Loki that's managing to succeed where no other Loki has.
The observation of the TVA is an interesting idea, and maybe the clue is in what we heard about in this episode about Loki's magic, because I'm thrilled about this detail around the difference between creating a duplicate of yourself versus just creating an illusion. What if this Loki, this Laufey's daughter, was meant to be reset, but actually only her copy, one of her duplicates that she put out, had been reset. So she actually managed to survive a slight variation and an attempted reset. So she was able to observe the hunters and these time reset devices, and maybe was even able to then start trying to track them down and find them. That's a pretty cool idea. I don't know. But I have an even simpler question about this Lady Loki, Jesse. Where do you think our Bevel's time door went to, and why?
So my thought is, we have a 6-episode series. If we're going with a traditional 3-act structure, we've got the first act, which is Loki's in this situation, is introduced to Mobius. They start working together. Then he breaks with the TVA. Now that means we're on to the second act. And I think the start of the second act is going to be Loki finding out that there is more going on with the TVA and Mobius's manipulation of him than they thought, and breaking apart the fragile relationship that they've built up.
Okay.
I think the time door is going to go to some place in Loki's life. My best prediction is somewhere in Thor Ragnarok, either when Hela kills Odin or when the actual moment of Ragnarok itself. But I think that given that Mobius hid critical moments of Loki's life from him in an effort to manipulate Loki into being part of the TVA, the best way to ensure that that both Lokis are on the same team, for Bevel to get Loki on her team, is to show him that he was lied to. Now, the question is, does she know that Mobius lied to him? Or will this Loki even care? But the lack of Thor Ragnarok in the events we've seen so far, we got a lot of Dark World. We got a lot of Avengers 1. And we even got basically the entire scene he had in Infinity War. But we've gotten very little of Ragnarok, which I think was both the best movie and the movie that changed the character of Loki more than any other. That's my prediction.
I like that. I was sticking with the Dark World theme just because it does feel like they're trying to make that movie count for something and appreciate their rescue mission. So I was thinking about Svartalheim, which I think is the planet of the Dark Elves. They had a kind of apocalypse, and if Loki wanted to hide out somewhere, I thought that might be another way to kind of draw us back into that mythology of that movie a little bit more. But your idea is better. I think wherever we go, we might meet a council of Lokis. And I had multiple people pointing out to me, Jesse, and I'm curious as a Fantastic Four aficionado if you knew this, that the Council of Rick's idea from Rick and Morty is a direct ripoff of the Council of Reed Richards that happened in the Fantastic Four, that there's a bunch of Reed Richards from all the different timelines that get together. I missed that in the FF run somewhere, so my apologies to the comics crowd. And I appreciate the clarification, don't get me wrong. But I think the Council of Lokis could be on the table. We might get to meet our Tour de France guy, or at least some other version that wasn't eradicated by the TVA, that kind of a thing.
I like that idea. And actually, when I heard, I've only ever watched a couple of episodes of Rick and Morty, but the second I heard about the Council of Ricks, I am much more familiar with Fantastic Four. So I was like, okay, that's the Council of Reeds, or the Council of Reed Richards. If we get that idea with Loki, I think that given Tom Hiddleston's versatility as an actor and what we now know can be done with Loki, where they're willing to go with Loki, I would love it. And I think there are actually some issues of Loki where Loki meets multiple variants of himself.
There are.
And to explore that idea, and also, I know that when the trailer / the image came out showing that Loki was gender fluid, a lot of people assumed that detail was only out. It was sort of a nod, It's something we're going to say about Loki, the character of Loki, but then never really use it again. But we've already seen that Loki now is both male and female. I think we could get into seeing all the variations of Loki, taking our Loki out of his narrow conception of being kind of the raven-haired trickster into here's everything you could possibly be. I'm going to open your mind as to who you truly are and what your destiny could be.
Yeah, I'd like to see Soccer Mom Loki. Would be one I'd enjoy. I feel.
Oh, yeah.
Although I guess we already did get our blonde lady, so
I know.
Not to stereotype.
Suburban dad Loki, just from a selfish perspective.
Right. What football team would suburban dad Loki root for?
Ooh. I was initially going to say the Patriots.
Oh, my God.
But I'm going to go with the Buccaneers. Suburban dad Loki follows Tom Brady wherever Tom Brady goes.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That is truly the evil move. I don't know what to make of that. I was trying to think about what's a football team that always seems like they're going to win it all and then comes up short, because that feels like our Loki. But the Vikings are too pathetic. The Eagles actually won a Super Bowl, so that doesn't work anymore.
The Packers?
The Packers are pretty good.
I felt like the Packers are that team.
Yeah, the Packers are pretty good. All right, enough Loki talk. I want to get into this timeline and the timekeepers. So for the second week in a row, I think Christine posed a very good question. This time I know it was definitely in the group text. But we need to talk about the sacred timeline and these questions of looping, because we just discussed, we saw Frost Giant Loki, we saw Tour de France Loki, we saw Hulk-looking Loki, we saw some other weird, cool, interesting Lokis. But as Christine said, if there was one sacred timeline, if there is one sacred timeline, how can there be a bunch of different Lokis? How can, as Mobius says in the first episode, this keep happening over and over again, but with differences? How can we make sense of this contradiction, the supposed contradiction from the TVA's own people? Because even this episode, when Loki and Mobius are talking in the cafeteria the second time, Mobius says the timekeepers are ahead of us fixing stuff later down the timeline. But if we're getting all these variations of Loki, doesn't that mean this has all happened multiple times before? I have some semi-coherent hypotheses, but I need some help. What do you have for me?
So this is something that I've been struggling with too, because you're right. If there's a timeline, the idea being that we're taking the nonlinear concept of time and pruning it until it becomes a line. But we also know that variant timelines or offshoot timelines are permitted to exist for some period of time. And it may be indefinitely, it may only be a few minutes, but we know that there's that red line. And as long as the variant timeline doesn't approach that timeline, you can have any number of versions of a Renaissance fair in 1985 Wisconsin. Absolutely. That is absolutely permitted. And so what I have to figure is that in these variant timelines, Loki's entire persona now comes from his attachment to his view of himself as an Asgardian king, as a person who is entitled to all the benefits of royalty, so he will look like royalty, who will have the long hair and the Asgardian leather that he so tragically lost in the first episode. And perhaps there are just minor inflection points in Loki's life where he gets really obsessed with Lance Armstrong, or
oh God,
you know, he finds out about the Hulk and he says, "I want that. That's exactly what I want." And because the variance isn't enough to make the timeline destabilized, those Lokis can exist, but they always end up trying to escape from the timeline in some way. And the sense I get is that Loki is this strange touch point in the timeline that is so volatile and so unpredictable that his very existence is always going to create these variants. That's the best way I can think of to explain it, unless we also think about the fact that maybe the timeline is only a timeline if we look at it from a certain perspective. Mm-hmm. And if you flipped it, instead of being a single line, it would look almost like spaghetti. So it'd be like if you line up a bunch of spaghetti in a row and you look at it directly from the side, it looks like one strand of spaghetti.
Right.
But then if you flip it, or if you look at it from a different perspective, you actually have 100 different strands of spaghetti all proceeding along the same line. If you were to follow them, you'd be following 100 different lines. So the timeline could actually be 100 different timelines, or 1,000 or 1,000,000, all occurring together. And so the sacred timeline is looking at it only from that flat perspective and only caring when one of those many strands starts to deviate. And so even the TVA itself may conceive of time in a simplified and less true way than it actually exists. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I don't know if the spaghetti metaphor works, but much like Loki, I will just dump salt and pepper and weird boxed water on it until you get what I'm talking about.
But no, it makes sense to me, that this idea that there's actually, we might be looking at one spaghetti noodle, right? One flat noodle, but if we were to step up and look down upon it from the top as opposed to from the side, we would see there's a huge row, like an infinite amount of spaghetti noodles directly behind this spaghetti noodle, for example. And that if anything branches off from there on any one of those, that's bad. But that makes some sense to me. I was trying to work with the circle imagery when I was trying to parse together whether I could make sense of what Christine was asking. Because the tension of this kind of works if you imagine that the timeline is not a straight line, but a circle, and you just kept drawing the same circle in the exact same place over and over and over again. And maybe you can't trace it perfectly, but you can stay very close every time with only some slight imperfections. You know, each time you go around, oh, maybe Loki looks more like a frost giant this time. Oh, maybe this time Loki is into the Tour de France and, that sort of thing. And then to your point, Loki is always a problem. It's just a question of which minor adjustments happen. What I did not realize, Jesse, is that the question of whether a circle is a line is a hot topic on the math internet.
Oh, shit. Are we getting in the hot topics in math?
Oh, man. So, yeah. Apparently, in Euclidean geometry, a circle is not considered a line. It's considered a disk, right? We're talking about an object, a thing that has something, it's not just the perimeter of the object. It's a thing. But there's also this belief that a straight line is merely an infinite perfect circle, like the edge of an infinite perfect circle, right? Because if a circle is infinite, then it doesn't ever actually curve, right? It's just straight, but it's still technically a circle somehow. The shit is wild. The point is, apparently in math, a line and a circle are as hard to define as this whole concept of time that we are wrestling with.
Doesn't it really kind of make you feel inadequate as a species that even what should be, or what I think of as a very simple concept, a line and a circle, like something from the time you're 3 or 4 years old, you can identify that's a line, that's a circle. But what is it? And the fact that we're still struggling with this millennia after we've come up with these concepts is just utterly fascinating.
I agree. And so I'm really torn on the TVA because on one hand, they are propagating the myth of the straight line. In the video, they show the timekeepers holding the straight line, the spaghetti noodle, in your analogy, and who knows how many other noodles are behind it, or even in the thing that they're holding, how many noodles could be inside of that one pack that they're holding. It's tough to say. So they seem to be propagating this myth about the straight line. But hey, for all we know, that's just the edge of an infinite circle, Jesse. I don't know what to tell you. So, speaking of these timekeepers, let's try to get a little more tangible. Jesse, I want you to put your cards on the table because we're probably going to get an answer to this in the series. Are the timekeepers real? And if so, will we meet them? What do you think?
Now, when you say are the timekeepers real, do you mean the exact portrayal of the timekeepers we've seen? Or do you mean that there are some entities called timekeepers?
Yeah, great question, Mr. Lawyer Man. And having pulled some previous lawyer shit on you before, I appreciate you bringing it back on me. No, here's what I mean. I mean that there are specific beings who are timekeepers who are doing some or most of the job as described by the TVA. It doesn't necessarily mean they are these 3 all-knowing space lizards, that they look anything like this, but they are mostly in control. They created the TVA. They have the power or a version of the power that's described. That's kind of what I mean by timekeepers.
So I think there's definitely a character or multiple characters who are serving as kind of the overseers / designers of the TVA. So we know from Renslayer that she hears from somebody. She is in communication with some person, people, entity.
She says he is, just like the Pope says he is. I don't know, man.
Oh, let's not get into Catholicism right now.
Fair enough. My bad.
But we know that, at least as has been portrayed so far, there is some person in the hierarchy, and the TVA seems very hierarchical. So it would make sense that there's a level above what we've seen that we don't get to see day to day. Now, I definitely don't think there are 3 space lizards. I am not even sure I think there are multiple timekeepers. And the primary reason for that is that the TVA is so purpose-driven, and they've effectively created religious cops. These are cops who believe that they are imbued with sacred authority to do what they need to do. And so it's hard for me to see a situation, if you look at the history of, in particular, cults, because there's a lot of very cult-like elements of the TVA.
Yeah.
Cults tend to work most successfully, I'll say. They tend to spread most efficiently when there is one person at the top who has people under his or her thrall. Yeah. As opposed to having 3 people who have to work together. Now, maybe they're super enlightened. Maybe they have some sort of telepathic communication that just lets them be on the same page, design the TVA, define the mission, etc. But I just can't see there being a cadre of 3 that's doing all this. What about you?
Well, Jesse, to answer this question, I have to talk about Catholicism, so settle in for a second, buddy. As a Roman Catholic growing up, I experienced quite a bit of pomp and circumstance. I experienced quite a bit of bureaucracy. I experienced quite a bit of mission drift. Both, I talked to a lot of people who work for a Catholic church growing up who were convinced both of the existence of God and had no material evidence for it. And I am not one that is here to tell you, the listener, where you should land on that question. But what I will say is I think that timekeepers will function much like a Catholic God will function, which is to say, Ravonna is kind of like the Pope claiming to be in communication. We'll never know for sure whether that's true or how much that's true and whether we get any of that. But Jesse, the thing that is wrong with my idea is that C20 says that she confessed to Loki how to get to the timekeepers and where they are and stuff. So I can't figure what she's talking about.
Right, which there is some other location, some other place that is important and that the TVA hides.
Yeah.
And I don't know what level of access you have to have, but a field agent knows about this. We know Mobius knows about it.
Well, but he doesn't. He's never met them. So how does this lady?
Right.
No.
That's actually a really good point. Does she outrank Mobius?
Not that I would think of. Although I guess B-15 says that in the field, B-15 is the boss. So maybe they're equivalent ranks of different responsibility.
Yeah. And maybe field agents have to know things about timekeepers that folks like Mobius don't for whatever reason. Administrators don't need to know.
Yeah, so I'm going on the side of we'll never meet them, but we won't also get a confirmation that they are totally not real. But enough about the timeline, Jesse. Let's get into our final topic, the past. You seem like you have multiple questions for us, so I can't wait to soak in whatever you have ready for us to discuss.
I would like to talk about the perhaps biggest mystery of the episode. When Mobius is in Renslayer's office, she hands him a form to sign and a pen, and the camera lingers on the pen. And the pen reads Franklin D. Roosevelt High School, which is a real high school in Brooklyn, New York.
It is.
But we've never seen word one about this high school anywhere in the MCU before. It's not in the comics. There's no FDR High School anywhere in the comics. What does it mean, Mark?
Jesse, I have literal goosebumps right now to tell you what I think. And I want to give full credit to the website that had this theory on it. It is a website called Games Radar, which, of course, we all know is the most trusted source in Marvel theories and ideas. Now, I don't know that I've ever read anything on Games Radar, but Jesse, 1985 keeps coming up. 1985 is when the Ren Fairy is. 1985 is when the song Holding Out for a Hero comes out. 1985 is when Josta Cola premieres. 1985 is when the miniseries Secret Wars debuts. And Secret Wars is all about all of the heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe getting teleported off to another planet by this guy called the Beyonder to do battle with each other. It's just an epic crossover 12-issue miniseries. Jesse, in that comic, we learned that a character went to high school in Brooklyn. We don't get the name of the high school. Do you know, off the top of your head, I'm surprising you with this, which character we learn went to high school in Brooklyn? It's a bad guy. I'll give you that. It's in the villain camp.
I think I know this. And do you know why I know this? 1, you said you had goosebumps.
Yeah.
2, I remember reading Secret Wars.
Yeah.
And 3, I know it's not Doctor Doom and I know it's not Magneto. And it's the Beyonder, Molecule Man.
Yeah, dude. It's frickin' Molecule Man. So folks who listen to PonderVision will know that Jesse talked about Molecule Man last episode. Here's the thing. Molecule Man went to high school in Brooklyn. He has all kinds of connections to timey-wiminess in the Marvel Universe. Jesse broke a lot of that down for us last episode. Go back and listen to that if you haven't. He also is often seen with a wand or has this wand ability. And the pen is like a great stand-in for the wand. And I am just super intrigued by the idea that is actually the clue that we're going to get Molecule Man in Loki, Jesse.
Now, if this happens, I would like episode 1 of Loki in PonderVision to go down in history as the greatest call I've ever made, even if everything about the actual call itself was wrong.
No, but you invoked Molecule Man when there was literally nothing pointing to it.
No reason to. And Molecule Man is the perfect kind of character for this new era of like timey-wimey, multiversal Marvel, because he has this sort of broad set of powers, but is also limited by his own sort of personality, character quirks, character flaws.
And one of the first Marvel characters, especially in the 80s when they didn't really do a ton of this, who was like, oh, sure, I could reform the universe to my liking, but I just prefer to chill here with my lady friend.
Yes. Like, who I am is the guy who's chilling.
Yes.
I am not a conqueror. And Molecule Man, how he's conceived of in the comics, actually goes along with sort of how the TVA functions as well. Because the TVA is effectively like this organization that comes in and just lays a bomb to disrupt the timeline and make it go away whenever it needs to. And Molecule Man, we talked about this a little bit last week, but I'll elaborate on it a little bit more. There is a Molecule Man in every timeline and every dimension. And when that Molecule Man dies, it is the end of that timeline. It completely disappears. So if there is a person who sort of embodies naturally what the TVA has designed, could the Timekeepers be a Molecule Man?
Man, that's wild. So I don't watch ASMR videos, but I do get that weird tingly feeling in the back of my head sometimes. And whenever Jesse is talking about Molecule Man, I get the weird tingly feeling in the back of my head. So it just delighted me to no end to just sort of tee this up and surprise him with this theory. I was desperately hoping you hadn't also discovered this article, and I'm so tickled that you didn't, so I could just wind you up with Molecule Man stuff.
So what website was it on?
Games Radar, Jesse. Games Radar.
My homepage.
Yeah. I mean, it's just the homepage of the internet. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm surprised Google hasn't closed the deal for many tens of billions. No, look, you should actually, it is, I'm teasing Games Radar. It's a really fun and well-written piece about Molecule Man and the potentials of this. So just Google Games Radar Molecule Man, and I'm sure y'all will find it. It's well worth a little read. They stretch it into some interesting spaces that aren't necessarily worth getting into on the pod, but it's worth it, man. And I love the fact that this could happen for you.
Now I know what my post-pandemic tattoo is going to be.
You got it. But you have to do it on the face, Jesse. I need your lightning bolts on the face, because that's what Molecule Man has. He has these like scars that are kind of like Ms. Marvel type lightning bolts, but on his face. And you have to get them all over your face. I'm sure your job will love that.
I know. That's going to be super helpful. Just any job, I think, would love that.
Yeah, definitely. Lightning bolts to the face. That says I've got my shit together.
And I have one more question, which is kind of just a fun way to end the episode. Something I think after our lengthy conversation about our feelings last week is we didn't really get to. But we know from the first episode that Loki was D.B. Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
What other historical figures do you think Loki has been? Either temporarily or permanently. And the reason I include temporarily is that we know Loki's always up to something. And it would be kind of hard if he were, I don't know, Ronald Reagan.
For like all of his life, like doing the movies with the chimpanzee and also being president. Yeah.
Right. It would just be very difficult for him to have been that person for 8+ decades.
Right.
So completely wild conjecture. Go for it.
Would you like my serious answer or my fun answer first?
Let's do serious answers first. Then
okay, great.
Answers.
This is why I'm so glad you included temporary, Jesse, because my serious answer is Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic, speared to St. Louis. Everybody knows about all that stuff. And thanks to, recent HBO miniseries and whatnot, people now also are learning about the fact that Charles Lindbergh was a failed fascist, semi-revolutionary who was a big Hitler apologist and kind of the worst. I like the idea that Loki took over Charles Lindbergh's place because Charles Lindbergh was a very good looking guy and sort of a heartthrob of the time. And he was very jealous of Lindbergh getting all this love and attention. And then he stepped in and basically tried to get America to go along with Hitler and failed because Loki always fails at his terrible fascist schemes. So that's my serious answer, Charles Lindbergh.
All right. I'll buy that.
Well, then give me your serious one as well, and then we'll do our fun ones.
The thing about it is I'm not sure which is which. So I'm just going to go with the one I like the most first.
Okay, good.
Prince.
Okay. Yeah, that's a much nicer, happier, more positive vibe Loki than Charles fucking Lindbergh.
Right. Because I don't think Loki hasn't always been a fascist.
Yeah.
And if you think about Prince has sort of the epitome of a trickster personality. Everything about him was just always doing his own thing. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about Prince is that everyone has a Prince story. There's so many stories where Prince was just in an unexpected place doing something unexpected. And I could see Loki looking at Earth and saying, do you know who would be a fascinating person to be if I want to understand these mortals? This, again, kind of, in many ways, gender non-conforming purple man who is a beloved star, but who could also show up anywhere at any time and do virtually anything.
That's a beautiful idea. And it really speaks to the fact that I think you're very generous to Loki. Like at a fundamental level, I find you to be very generous to Loki because I'm out here accusing him of trying to make America a Nazi state.
Right.
You're really not going to like my fun answer either. But I think Prince is like the beautiful side. It's the reason we root for this character, you know? And I think it's really cool. I'm being serious, actually, when I say, like, I think it's really cool that you connect with him. Everybody likes to make fun of me for connecting with Mobius, apparently, but for some reason I'm really into that dude. But I'll let Christine shame me for that and character cast more this week. But no, I think that's really a really cool idea that I makes me wish I was finding that generosity of spirit now.
Well, also maybe it's what makes our podcast work. If I'm the Loki and you're the Mobius.
No, it is. I mean, hey, look, you got to have a yin and yang. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Now, is your funny answer like Idi Amin or?
Oh my God. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's where I like to land my humor.
Right.
Look, are you familiar with the name Frank Farian?
No.
Jesse, are you familiar with the name Milli Vanilli?
Yes.
Okay. So for folks who don't know, Milli Vanilli was this pop act in the 80s that turned out to be lip syncers, and it was this huge quote-unquote scandal, which in retrospect was actually really awful to the two guys who were just, basically dancers who were recruited into this thing and got in way over their heads because they were the ones hung out to dry. But the guy who invented, created, and produced Milli Vanilli, Jesse, is Frank Farian. And I'm fucking telling you, that guy was Loki.
That makes more sense than I care to admit.
But you think he's Prince, and I think he's out here producing Milli fucking Vanilli. So, I mean, I'm just fascinated by our juxtaposition of the musical career of Loki. Maybe he's both.
And who knows? That could be it. He's Prince walking around, sees how the music industry works for these mortals in this world. And he says, you know what? I could probably do this. I'm going to find two guys to put their faces to this pop song that, Loki could have written that in an afternoon sitting on a hill in Asgard.
Absolutely. Girl, you know it's true. Look it up on Spotify. Ooh, I love you.
So, again, the problem is this actually may be more serious than my serious one.
Okay.
Here's my thought. L. Ron Hubbard.
Now that's fucking brilliant. Tell me more.
So, for those of you who don't know, L. Ron Hubbard was a science fiction author who, for most of his early life, was just this kind of incredible fabulist about his own experience, about his health, about virtually everything. And then in the 50s and 60s, he came up with this kind of strange theory called Dianetics. And Dianetics is an anti sort of anti-psychology view of the world that says you can sort of improve yourself through a series of techniques. Now, there are some very odd parts to Dianetics.
You don't say.
One of them being the view that there was an alien general who slaughtered the universe and all the beings in it who are called Thetans. And so the dead souls of Thetans rest within every living human. And what Dianetics does is gives you a path to rid yourself of these Thetan. Now, you might not have heard of Dianetics, but you've probably heard of how it's more popularly known, Scientology. And Scientology is a dangerous, abusive, terrible cult. Also, the exact kind of thing that a trickster god would come up with to see if these pitiful mortals would buy it.
It's so brilliant.
And it is aimed at the rich and powerful, many of whom have bought into it.
Yeah.
And L. Ron Hubbard was exactly the kind of person you would imagine Loki would embrace. This person who was never quite honest about himself, never quite honest about who he was or where he came from, who viewed himself as having unlocked the mysteries of the universe, when in actuality he probably died in pain in a trailer somewhere in the desert because everything he was saying was a lie, even though he made millions of dollars and got millions of followers out of it.
God. And all his weird space theories are exactly the kind of fun thing I feel like Loki would try to mess with people just to see what he could get them to believe. It's not that different than what Loki was pulling in the tent in the Ren Fair, trying to be like, that the timekeepers are in much more danger than we realize or they realize. And all that shit is really right up L. Ron Hubbard's alley, man. That is super insightful.
Man, I've read so much about Scientology over the years. If you ever want to read good books about Scientology, one of the best is Going Clear, Scientology in the Prison of Belief by an author named Lawrence Wright. So that's one place to start if you want to read more about Scientology. But yeah.
Yeah, I took him to the Catholic place. You take him to the Scientology place. I'm, again, really fascinated by our conceptions of this character. It's so fun to talk about this with you, man. If folks want to keep this conversation going, Jesse, where can they find and follow you?
So I'm on Twitter at Jesse L. Taylor, and I also have a Substack called Action Figure Birthday. In case you want to look that up, I just sent out a newsletter today about the show Apple and Onion, the pandemic, Paw Patrol, our conceptions of work and self and personal value. Most of what I write about is just a sort of personal and pop culture inflected as we get into on the show. So if you want more of that, go find it.
Highly recommend Action Figure Birthday. There's actually a ton about Mobius, in my opinion, in this newsletter. Now, Jesse doesn't name Mobius at all, talking about Paw Patrol and all this other stuff, but I think the person who is consumed by work, whose job is their entire life, is something I think about as Mobius all the time. And anyway, Jesse gets into all of that. I highly recommend it. It's so much fun. All right, podcast powerhouses, that is our show for today. We do have a ton more Loki to discuss. We have Character Cast on Monday, and then, of course, we'll be here to break down the next episode of Loki on Thursday with more Storycast, and then the return of PonderVision next Saturday. So if you're enjoying our show, please do leave us that 5-star Apple review. I know the new podcast app sucks. Kate from Twitter, I hear you. It sucks, but we really do need to rise in those search rankings if you are enjoying the show, so please leave something there and then go back to Overcast or wherever you come from, because, yeah, we all need a new and better podcast home. But in the meantime, if you want to talk to me about any of this, you can hit me up on the Marvelous TV Club Facebook page, Twitter page, Instagram page, or on Twitter at Marc Faletti. That's Marc with a C, F like Frank, Aletti. All right, Jesse, let's go found some kind of weird cult religion and see if Loki gets jealous and takes our place.
Which space lizard are you going to be?
The handsome one.
Ooh, I'll be the tall one.